There is a pattern a lot of empaths feel, but they cannot easily explain it. You meet someone, and in the beginning, everything seems smooth. It feels easy. It feels natural. It feels like you both understand each other without much effort. Then slowly something changes. The same kind of people keep showing up in different faces. They feel draining. They feel manipulative. They feel emotionally heavy. After a while, you start asking yourself a hard question. Why does this keep happening to me? Is it bad timing? Is it bad luck? Or is there something in the way I move through life that keeps pulling these people in? Stay with me, because this is where the pattern starts making sense. It is not random. It is not magic. And it is not just one unlucky chapter repeating itself. There is usually a psychological reason behind it. Once you see that reason, the confusion starts to fade and the whole thing becomes easier to understand. What used to feel mysterious starts to feel visible. What used to feel personal starts to feel predictable. And that matters because you cannot change what you do not see. If this kind of insight hits close to home, keep listening because the deeper part is still coming. Most people only look at who enters their life. Very few stop and study what their own presence may be quietly signaling before a single word is even said. Most empaths think the problem is fully outside of them. They tell themselves they just keep meeting the wrong people, or they keep ending up in the wrong situations. That explanation sounds reasonable, but it does not go deep enough. Repeated patterns usually have a structure. If the same kind of dynamic keeps entering your life again and again, there is often a mechanism creating it, not something mystical, something human, something psychological. When people talk about an aura in this kind of situation, it does not have to mean anything supernatural. It can simply mean the signals other people read from you without even knowing they are reading them. It is in your body language. It is in how open your face looks. It is in the pace of your voice. It is in how quickly you respond. It is in how much emotional room you give someone. All of that creates a presence, and people react to that presence almost instantly. They may not sit there and think, I am analyzing this person, but they still feel something. They still register something. Empaths often send a very specific signal without trying. Warmth, safety, understanding, emotional openness, low resistance. They do not usually appear hard to reach. They seem calm. They seem kind. They seem emotionally available. To healthy people, that can feel beautiful. It can feel comforting. It can feel like real connection. But here is where the trouble begins. The same signals that feel safe to healthy people can feel like easy access to the wrong person. And that small misunderstanding is where a lot of painful stories quietly begin. What feels like warmth from an empath can be read very differently by someone who is unhealthy inside. Instead of seeing kindness, they may see access. Instead of seeing emotional depth, they may see a person they can lean on without limits. That is the shift. That is the part many people miss. Toxic people are often much more observant than they appear. Not always in a cold, planned, calculated way. More like instinct. More like a fast inner radar. They notice who listens without pushing back. They notice who gives without asking too many questions. They notice who keeps trying to understand even when something feels off. They notice who stays present in discomfort instead of stepping away. Those are not small details to them. Those are signs. Those are clues. And empaths often show many of these signs naturally, not because they are weak, not because they are naive, but because openness is often their default setting. They listen deeply. They hold space. They try to understand before judging. They care more about connection than conflict. In healthy relationships, those qualities are powerful. They help create trust. They help people feel seen. But in unhealthy dynamics, those same qualities can be interpreted as opportunity. That is the hard truth. Openness without clear limits does not only look kind, it can also look available in a way that invites testing, little by little, step by step. And the wrong person rarely tries to take everything at once. They test slowly. They push gently. They expand their reach over time. If you have ever felt this happening too late, you are not imagining it. That slow build is exactly how these patterns often grow. Attraction is not always about love, care, or true emotional connection. Sometimes it works on a different level. Sometimes people are drawn to someone not because they want to know them deeply, but because they need something from them. And in many cases, what they need is regulation. They want someone who can hold the emotional pressure they cannot hold by themselves. They want someone who can stay calm while they stay chaotic. They want someone who will sit with their contradictions, their mood swings, their confusion, their instability, without walking away. Empaths often fit that role without realizing it. They listen more than they speak. They absorb intensity instead of rejecting it. They try to understand instead of confront. They stay present longer than most people would. and that creates a loop, a subtle one. The more emotional support the empath gives, the more the other person learns they can keep taking. At first, it may not even look harmful. It may feel close. It may feel intimate. It may even feel special. That is why this pattern is so hard to catch early. What looks like connection in the beginning can slowly turn into dependence on one side and exhaustion on the other. One person starts using the relationship as a place to unload. The other becomes the emotional container. And once that system is formed, it can begin to feel normal even when it is deeply uneven. Watch this part closely because it changes everything. A bond can feel strong and still be unhealthy. A connection can feel intense and still be built on imbalance. That is why intensity alone should never be mistaken for depth. Then the pattern moves even deeper, because this is not only about who is attracted to empaths. It is also about what begins to happen inside the empath over time. Many empaths slowly start tying their sense of value to being needed. Not in an obvious way, not in a dramatic way, in a quiet emotional way. When they help someone, they feel useful. When they support someone, they feel important. When they understand another person's pain, they feel connected. That feeling can become powerful. And if it repeats enough, it can turn into an inner rule without ever being said out loud. Being needed starts to feel like being worthy. That is where the trap begins. Because once your worth gets linked to being needed, your behavior starts moving toward situations where you can play that role again. Not toward balance, not toward peace, toward emotional demand. Stable people may not light up that same inner response. They do not need to be saved. They do not need constant soothing. They do not activate the fixer role. But emotionally messy people often do. They pull that part of the empath forward. So the empath becomes the listener, the supporter, the stabilizer, the one who understands, the one who stays. And after repeating that role again and again, it starts to feel familiar. Then familiarity becomes identity. This is just who I am, they tell themselves. But here is the cost. This role does not build equal relationships. It builds emotional labor. One person keeps holding, processing, calming, adjusting. The other keeps receiving. If this is sounding uncomfortably familiar, that is because many people live inside this pattern for years before they realize it has a name. And by the time they see it clearly, the exhaustion has already started settling into the body and the mind. Boundaries are usually where this whole issue becomes painfully clear. A lot of empaths understand boundaries in theory. They know boundaries matter. They know limits are healthy. They know saying no is necessary. But knowing something in your mind and doing it in real life are not the same thing. That gap is huge. For many empaths, setting a boundary feels emotionally wrong even when it is logically right. Saying no can feel harsh. Pulling back can feel cold. Creating distance can feel like hurting someone. So even when they know they should protect their space, something inside them hesitates. Instead of holding a firm line, they stretch. They give a little more time, a little more patience, a little more understanding, a little more emotional access, then a little more. And people notice that. Even if they never say it out loud, they notice it. Human beings are always learning from feedback. When someone keeps adjusting instead of stopping the behavior, a message gets sent. This person is flexible. This person will bend. This person will not block me easily. Once that message enters the relationship, it shapes everything that follows. Expectations begin to grow. Access begins to widen. Demands begin to increase, often very slowly. That is why the pattern can feel invisible at first. It does not usually arrive as one big violation. It arrives through repeated small allowances. And over time, those allowances become the normal shape of the relationship. It is important to hear this clearly. Tolerance is not the same as strength. Endless patience is not always a virtue. Sometimes it is just unguarded energy being consumed one small piece at a time. And the sad part is that the empath often does not notice how much has been taken until they feel empty. As time passes, the emotional cost becomes harder to ignore. The shift is rarely dramatic in the beginning. It is slow, quiet, subtle. The empath starts feeling heavy, tired for no clear reason, mentally crowded, emotionally overloaded. Sometimes there is no visible chaos at all. Sometimes it just feels like a quiet kind of exhaustion that follows them everywhere. And instead of reading that exhaustion as a warning, they often try even harder. They explain more. They listen more. They give more grace. They make more effort to clear up misunderstandings. They become more available, not less. Why? Because part of them still believes the problem can be fixed with enough emotional work. If I become more patient, things will settle. If I show more understanding, this person will relax. If I keep giving, eventually the balance will return. But that is where the truth starts pressing through. The imbalance is not there because the empath failed to try enough. It is there because the relationship was built unevenly from the start. One person is doing most of the regulating, adapting, and absorbing. The other is receiving the benefit without matching that same level of responsibility. So the empath is no longer just loving or caring, they are compensating. Compensating for inconsistency, compensating for emotional instability, compensating for a lack of mutual effort. That is when the relationship starts feeling less like connection and more like maintenance. And emotional maintenance without balance always turns into depletion. Not maybe, always. This is the part many people need to hear twice. More effort does not fix a structure that is built on imbalance. More patience does not automatically create reciprocity. Sometimes giving more only teaches the other person that the giving will continue no matter how uneven things become. This is why the same experience can keep repeating with different people. On the surface, it looks like bad luck. Different names, different faces, same emotional ending. But if you look deeper, the pattern repeats because it works for the other side, not for the empath. For the person receiving the access, the patience, the understanding, the support, human behavior gets reinforced by outcome. If a certain style of interaction keeps producing comfort, attention, emotional relief, or soft landing space for someone, they have very little reason to stop that behavior on their own, even if the dynamic is unfair, even if it is draining, even if it is quietly hurting the other person. As long as the system keeps rewarding one side, the system keeps going. This is where empaths sometimes focus too much on intention and not enough on reinforcement. They want to know if the person means harm. They want to know if the person is aware, but patterns do not survive only because of conscious intention. They survive because the structure keeps producing the same reward. If the empath keeps offering emotional space every time the imbalance shows up, the pattern gets stronger. If the empath keeps staying when the relationship turns one-sided, the pattern gets stronger. If the empath keeps smoothing over discomfort before it teaches anything, the pattern gets stronger. That is why awareness matters more than guessing motives. You do not always need to know what the other person intended in order to see what the pattern is doing. And once you finally see it, a new question begins to replace the old one. Not why do these people keep appearing, but what in my own response keeps allowing the same dynamic to be built again? That question is harder, but it is also the question that opens the door to real change. Real change does not begin by trying to control who walks into your life. It begins much earlier. It begins in awareness, because without awareness, behavior stays automatic, and automatic behavior keeps creating familiar outcomes. This is where the inner shift starts. Instead of asking only why the wrong people keep showing up, you begin asking what signals you may be sending without knowing it. How quickly do you over-explain? How often do you rush to calm tension? How much emotional space do you give before trust is earned? How long do you stay in situations that already feel off? These things matter. They say something even when you never speak about them directly. And once you start noticing them, you do not need to become cold or distant. You do not need to shut your heart down. You simply become more conscious, more deliberate, more selective. You stop pouring energy into every uncomfortable moment. You stop treating every emotional problem around you like an assignment you must solve. You start noticing when you are trying to fix something that was never yours to carry. That can feel strange at first, maybe even uncomfortable. But discomfort is not always a sign that you are doing something wrong. Sometimes discomfort is just a sign that you are doing something new, and that is a powerful difference. Listen carefully here because this line matters. Growth often feels rude to the version of you that survived by overgiving. That is why change can feel unnatural in the beginning. But unnatural does not mean unhealthy. Sometimes it simply means you are stepping out of a pattern that has been running your life on repeat. And that is exactly how cycles start breaking, not with big speeches, but with quieter, stronger responses. One of the biggest shifts for an empath is learning not to rush in and remove every uncomfortable feeling the second it appears. For a long time, discomfort may have meant one thing only: fix it now, explain more, reassure more, give more, make the moment softer, make the tension disappear. But when healing starts, discomfort takes on a different meaning. It becomes information, it becomes feedback. It becomes a signal showing you where your limits are, where your habits live, where your emotional reflexes still take over. That is huge, because once discomfort becomes information instead of emergency, your whole presence begins to change. You stop reacting automatically. You pause, you watch, you choose. And in that pause, something powerful happens. Your energy no longer feels endlessly open in every direction. It no longer says, come closer no matter what. It no longer says, I will keep adjusting until this works. Instead, it starts saying something quieter and stronger. I am open, but I am aware. I am kind, but I am not unlimited. I care, but access is not automatic. That kind of presence is different. It feels grounded. It feels clear. It feels steady. And yes, some people will be less comfortable around it. That is not failure. That is filtering. People who only felt safe when you had no boundaries may not like the version of you that finally has them. Let that be information too. If someone becomes upset the moment your access changes, that tells you something important about what they were really attached to. Not your heart, not your depth, your availability. And once you see that difference, you stop confusing being chosen with being respected. Those are not always the same thing. In fact, they are often very different things. Your empathy was never the problem. Your openness was never the problem. Your emotional depth was never the problem. Those qualities are real strengths. They let you understand people in ways many others cannot. They let you notice pain early. They let you read what is unsaid. They let you connect deeply. None of that is wrong. The issue was never your ability to care. The issue was the lack of filtering around where that care was going. Empathy without boundaries becomes exhausting. It becomes unprotected. It becomes a wide open door where everything can enter. Other people's emotions, other people's instability, other people's needs, demands, projections, and unresolved patterns. When there is no filter, all of it gets absorbed. That is what creates confusion. That is what creates fatigue. That is what makes an empath feel like they are caring far more than they should. But when awareness enters, the whole structure changes. You begin to see that empathy is not meant to mean unlimited access. It is meant to be conscious, directed, chosen, used with wisdom. When empathy joins with awareness, it becomes something powerful. Not power over other people, power over your own attention, power over your energy, power over what gets close to your inner world and what does not. That kind of power is quiet, but it changes everything. Because now you are no longer available to everything. You are no longer emotionally open in every direction. You stop becoming a landing place for every unstable pattern that happens to find you. And because of that, something beautiful begins to happen. You naturally become more available to what actually matches you, not what drains you, not what uses you, what matches you, what respects your peace, what can meet you at the level you have always been offering others. When that shift happens, the outside world starts to rearrange itself in ways that feel almost strange at first. The same kinds of people may still exist. They do. But they stop finding the same level of access through you. That is the difference. The pattern breaks not because the world becomes perfect, but because your side of the door changes. Your presence starts giving different signals. You do not rush to explain yourself. You do not overextend just to prove you care. You do not keep holding emotional weight that another person refuses to carry themselves. You begin to notice the early signs, the testing, the slow push, the emotional leaning that comes too fast, and instead of automatically adjusting, you stay aware. You stay still. You let the moment show you what it is. That alone changes everything. Some people will fall away. Some connections will never fully form. And that can feel lonely for a moment if you are used to being deeply involved very quickly. But what leaves your life through boundaries often was never meant to stay through peace. That is worth remembering. Do not miss that line. What leaves when your limits become clear was often feeding on your lack of limits in the first place. The goal is not to become harder. The goal is to become clearer, not colder. Clearer, not disconnected, more grounded. Because the right people are not scared by healthy limits. They respect them. They do not need endless access to feel close to you. They do not need your exhaustion in order to feel secure. They can meet warmth with warmth, care with care, presence with presence. And that kind of connection feels different, less dramatic, less intoxicating, but far more real, far more stable, far more safe. So if this pattern has followed you for a long time, pause for a moment and look at it with honesty, not shame. The fact that you cared deeply was not your mistake. The fact that you tried to understand was not your mistake. The fact that you wanted connection was not your mistake. What hurt you was not your heart. What hurt you was giving access without enough awareness. That can change. Slowly, yes. But it can change. Start small. Notice when you are over-explaining. Notice when you feel pressure to fix someone else's mood. Notice when you are staying in emotional discomfort out of guilt instead of truth. Notice when being needed feels better than being known. Those moments tell you more than you think. They show you where the old pattern still lives. And once you can see it, you can interrupt it. That is where freedom begins. Not in becoming someone else, but in protecting what is already good inside you. Your empathy does not need to disappear. It needs direction. Your care does not need to shrink. It needs wisdom. Your openness does not need to die. It needs a door, a lock, and your full permission before anyone enters. That is how the cycle ends. Not all at once, but choice by choice, signal by signal, response by response. And over time, your energy stops calling in what feeds on softness without respect. It starts aligning with what can honor your depth without consuming it. If this hits you deeply, sit with it. Rewatch it in your mind. Let it sink in. Because once you understand that access changes everything, you never move through relationships the same way again.